Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Masc podcast. And today we're talking about what we wish we knew when we were age 20. So there'll be some great advice in here for everyone. The categories we're looking at: worship is first up, then education, women, business, and working out. So I'll kick off with worship then. For me, I didn't understand fully the first commandment and the fact that religion is our duties to God. And this is the first duty of every rational being. So, what does it mean to you guys to really put God first in your lives? And how have you got a deeper appreciation of that now compared to when you were 20? Religion isn't about feelings, it's something you have to actually do with your body as well as your spirit. And it has practical impact on the way you live your life. Tim, let's kick off with you.
Well, for me, it's an obvious one and probably a little bit formulaic, but I wish that I'd known about the Latin Mass when I was 20. I wish I'd known, frankly, about the Latin Mass when I was 10, because I can't ever recall precisely the moment that I became, for a decade and a half, 2 decades, a practical atheist. But it was sometime around fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And that it's that straightforward, that if I had been going to the Latin Mass and seeing the Eucharist revered the way one would expect it, commensurate to devotion, then I would not have had to toil in at least a kind of low-key atheism until I was in my middle 20s, from, I guess that's a decade and a half, because I really remember it starting in fifth grade. So it's a kind of a gimme answer, but I mean it.
So it was, you went to the Latin Mass for the first time in a long time, or the first time ever, and then that doubt was just dispelled. It was a transformative experience.
Yeah, it began to be dispelled as I got married. Somehow, unless it's a false memory, my wife and I were going to a diocesan Latin Mass before Summorum Pontificum by over a year, in 2006, and which is nifty. Not many people had diocesan Latin Masses before '07. And that began my journey back. We've all talked about this some on this show, but it wasn't immediately. It wasn't like a light switch, but it was a major set piece. It was the liturgical set piece in what I'd call the conditions for the possibility of believing this is real. Whereas when you grow up going to the Novus Ordo, at least in the American West, which is the most culturally bankrupt part of America, by the way, in the American West, it's a cultural wasteland, and it's bad songs, and you're goofing off during Mass, and it's really impossible for an intelligent young man to believe, particularly given all the gynocentric energy coming out of American Western Novus Ordos.
Gynocentric energy. That's a phrase we could unpack a bit. But Mike, what did you find in your early 20s with your relationship to God? This business about the first commandment and the worship of God being the first duty of every rational being.
I posted this on my Twitter maybe about a week or so ago. This occurred to me, and I said something to the effect of that a weak catechesis makes more atheists than actual atheist arguments. And I think that was definitely my autobiographical situation. I had a very weak catechesis, a very, magic man in the sky view that was taught to me. I was not taught the five ways correctly, even in my undergrad. And that weak foundation created the intellectual fissures that made me fall away from my faith for almost 20 years. And it was, by re-engaging the Catholic intellectual tradition earnestly that was able to bring me back. But I think, like, in retrospect, it all began with a really, what was Tim's phrase right there?
Gynocentric
gynocentric,
energy.
yeah, a gynocentric energy catechesis that was taught to me incorrectly, and that was not rationally grounded, and that got bowled over by a lot of skeptical arguments that I encountered in undergrad.
Mm.
So for me, I think that if I could go back, I would say, hey, look, pay attention to Aquinas more, pay attention to Aristotle more, learn the five ways correctly, and don't just buy into what your liberal hippie undergrad philosophy professor is telling you. That'd be the advice I'd give my 20-year-old self.
Yeah, and the problem of weak catechesis has probably got even worse compared to when you were 20 now, I would guess. Many young
Yeah, I
guys
would think.
are in a worse situation. So, what can they do, Mike? What would you want 20-year-old Mike to do right now?
I would suggest read anything you can find by Ed Fazer. I think is a good entry point to getting a good view of what the proper rational argumentation is, and what the proper articulation of the five ways from Aristotle and later from Aquinas. So Ed Fazer's um, The Last Superstition, I think, is a really good entry point. If you want something a little bit more industrial strength, a little bit more analytically rigorous, I'd suggest Peter Geach's God and Truth. Both of
Yeah.
those, I think, are pretty solid.
Yeah, geech on the fact that God is truth with the capital T, and religion is
Mhm.
not a matter of mere feelings. It's not squishy. It's the cold, hard facts that we can establish by the light of natural reason. This is why St. Paul condemns the pagans. It was inexcusable that they didn't worship God, because you can know this without Christian revelation. Even if you're missing out on some really important things that Revelation tells us, you can still know that God exists by natural reason alone. So we've had not attending the Latin Mass. Tim wishes he'd gone earlier. Mike had weak catechesis, wishes he'd read the right books earlier. Elliot, your story's a bit different, isn't it? You were all around the world, different religions, window shopping a bit more. What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Well, my tendency was, and to this day too, and I have to be vigilant against it, to put religion in the box of personal development. And so when I started reading and listening to guys like Alan Watts and Osho and the philosophies of the East, there was always this great promise of transcendence and nirvana and enlightenment. And I would approach religion with this instinct for personal gratification and self-aggrandization, rather than holding high the divine light and worshiping God. I thought it was religion when I was meditating in this way, or praying these mantras, or reading these holy scriptures. But to be honest, really it was, how can I make myself better? And I think that tends to be uh, the theme for most people in the West. It's just sort of a knee-jerk reaction. It just comes naturally to us. What am I getting out of this? How does this make me better? How does this enrich my life? And it was totally subjective as well, right? So there was no really objective truth. The center of focus was on me. And so rather than there being an objective truth in natural law, or an objective truth about God, an objective truth about Christ and his church, right? Because in the New Age, Christ is not objective. Christ is what I think he is, right? And you've got like 10,000 different people saying different things about him. He's an energy. He is. You are actually Christ, and the story is about you. Um, all kinds of different things. And so, of course, you get wrapped up in like, what is pleasing to me? What is the most pleasing uh, way to look at Jesus Christ? And of course, greatly averse to the Catholic Church, right? Because The church is all about rigor and discipline and objectivity and, very uncompromising about truth. And that just is not enlightened. That's a very archaic way of looking at the world, and that everything's black and white. And that fed my, you guys talked about gynocentric and, the effeminacy that we see, in the particular type of effeminacy we see in men today, of course, is born out of a form of feminism, right? So we need to be more emotional. We need to be more feeling in our relationship to God. And it wasn't until I was much older and, and really began to understand what it meant to be a man that I started to see that, well, this idea of God the Father and an objective truth and rigor and discipline and being rational rather than emotional is not only 100% true and most practical for life, but it's what's we're called to, and it for 2,000 years, Christ and His church has been calling us and calling men back to that. So to wrap it up, with my 20-year-old self, I would have, in a very crude way of saying it, I'd say stop being a bitch, right? Stop wanting things your way and being identified with your feelings and being subjective. Man up and face the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's a great way to put it. And Christ, who is truth himself, came to bring a sword because it cuts through truth and error. It's about division and being able to see things clearly. So that's something that I think still many men are confused about now. Religion as being wishy-washy, but the opposite is true. Now, one other thought I want to talk about with the first commandment before we move on is the idea that the greatest purpose of human life is ultimately getting to heaven. And if something's not helping you do that, then why are you doing it? How is it serving you in your life? So this relates to the whole question of priorities with the first commandment and what do we put first? And Mike, you brought up C.S. Lewis's idea on a couple of shows before that we have to put first things first. And if we don't, then we lose second things as well. And that's a bit of a hard concept for people to grasp. But say a bit more about this, and also reflecting on your early life. Where did you not put first things first, and how did things go wrong?
Yeah, so I think the quote is put first things first, and you get second things in its wake. Put second things first, and you lose both first and second things. And it's the most obvious thing in the world, right? That if you have a higher order priorities or transcendent priorities than things that are downstream, that are lesser in their natural position to that. If you get that out of order, then you're going to get everything out of order. So yeah, for me, it was using philosophy, various types of philosophy from the Enlightenment usually, and analytic philosophy is sort of a surrogate for God, and then career became a surrogate for God. Maybe a naive patriotism was also a big like gap filler for reverence for God. I think that things like knowledge or truth or the pursuit of truth or nation, these can be good things, but if they're not subordinated under God, then that can get out of whack. And then obviously, when I fell away from all of that and got into a really dark state, becoming hedonistic and putting myself first, sex and women and hedonism became my God, and led to a lot of pain and a lot of disorder. So I think that it just reconfirms the Lewis quote that putting God first, it orders everything else too, which isn't to say, and this is getting back to Elliot's point, that isn't to say, I get it. So if I put God first, then I get all the goodies, right? Like that's still to instrumentalize God. And that's not what Lewis is saying, but he is making the point that glorifying God is that's putting the creator first. That's what the creature ought to do, and good things will fall from that.
Yeah, it's interesting in your answer that you either worship God and have Him first, or you're going to idolize something. You don't get away
Or
from the topic
something.
of
Yeah,
having
yeah.
something.
There's no. Yep.
Yeah, there's going to be something
Mm.
number one. So you may as well make it what it should be, because anything else is going to crack
The-
under the weight that you are placing on it.
So just a point in that the my old like liberal atheist professors, they quote W.V. Quine often and say stuff like, well, Quine has this famous quote where he says, some people, they just prefer desert ontologies. So the idea being that I'm just going to be a radical skeptic about everything. I'm going to have this really sparse metaphysics, and you know, I really don't believe in all these extra metaphysical entities that's violating Occam's razor, et cetera, et cetera. It's like nobody lives like that. That's actually, if you look at any of these folks, they do have thick commitments. So something always does fill that gap, whether it's political ideology, hedonism, social justice, etc. There's no such thing as a desert ontology. It's just false.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We have to worship something, and unless it's God, it's ultimately just idolatry. Tim, Mike mentioned
Hmm.
career becoming a god or hedonism. Have you got any thoughts about this from when you were a younger man? What it truly means to put getting to heaven first and having your priorities correct?
Well, it's impossible to have your priorities correct when the axiom of the first that's involved by the first question isn't in order. The most you can do when your life is ordered around some first desideratum of that hour on Sunday, and it's something you don't believe in, the best you can do is a pale reflection in some ego-centered, anthropocentric way. So, like, if when I was doing whatever I did that I called the practice of religion as a kid because my mom made me go to mass and my mom made me get confirmed, mom and dad, but primarily my mom. Then it naturally grew into in undergrad college of, I'll go to church once a month, sort of form fit kind of thing. And naturally I tend toward corner cutting. And so it's like, well, if I need to go to mass once a week, I'm sure I can get away with once a month. That's how I did law school. Except I had an excuse thing because I had a sick kid. It's like, well, if other people can get away with the 10 hours of study, I should be able to do 6. For this or that given exam. That's if I'm not careful, that's my approach to things. And so I did that with church, and eventually it's good. It petered out, and I had to confront existentially whether or not I was a person of faith. And for a short while, I answered no. But I guess the point is really that if you don't have that first thing that you asked about in your first question, like proper devotion, which is the whole point of human life, is to worship God. It's not actually even to get to heaven. The purpose of the human creature is to worship God. He created us to worship Him. From our perspective, the best way we can put it is continue our existence by getting to heaven. But if that's not all wired up correctly, then the most you're going to do is either career. When I was a kid, I always, a kid and young teen, I always wanted to play professional basketball. And I didn't really I was from this family where, professional goals were important, but I was kind of eschewed that. I never fell into that trap, even though I wound up going to places like law school or grad school. And so it kind of just left me stranded, honestly. We'll talk about it with romance, but what wired me back to all this was getting married and getting married, not necessarily a Catholic, because Steph converted when we started going out. But I always balk when um, fellow trads say that married life isn't a vocation. It's the priesthood is the higher vocation. But I know I'm walking proof that the married life is at least a vocation, because it really helped call me back to not only proper liturgical worship, but everything else that's a second or third thing that follows from there. It called me back to. So I know married life is a vocation. It set me on the right path. It's a lower one, but one all the same. And I really hadn't had anything in my life in order, even though I was sort of a neo-stoic in some ways, even as an undergrad that was essentially an atheist. The point is, vocation, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a couple questions, that really helped me get it all in order. And I don't think I ever had it fully in order.
Elliot, how about you? The way Tim's putting it there, that human beings are ultimately made to worship God. Did you have something in your life ever that was where that should have been, that was leading you astray, an idol?
Oh yeah. For me, it was football and girls, right? So it's so easy to be drawn in by the world, right? So there's so things that are so much more important than God and prayer. And even like I said before, in terms of the type of religion I was attracted to and the way I would practice religion, it was like prosperity gospel. It was like more a matter of like, how is this religion gonna make me a more wealthy or more attractive or stand out more? And so it was always worldly, as opposed to what Christ calls us, which is to sacrifice our lower nature, our desire for honor and wealth and power and pleasure, and find glory in suffering. Right. So it was like, what could I do to help myself not suffer? It was the positioning. So yeah, there's and like, I say this as if like, okay, 20-year-old Elliot was so much less evolved than I am right now, but like I still struggle, I still fight, I still uh have these hangups, right? Like where and the Catholic faith is funny too, because like there's all these promises for reading praying the rosary, right? Like so I can get really caught up in like who was it that wrote that book about the rosary? Saint
Louis de
Liguori, or I
Montfort.
don't know, de
Louis de
Montfort.
Montfort.
Yeah. And like so I started reading the rosary because I came across a YouTube video about that. I was like, wow, everything I want will be granted, and I'll have all these graces, and it will keep me free from sin. So I don't know. It's like utilitarian, and I don't know, because like even like with like divine mercy and like there's all these things that I have to be honest. Like I'm not worshiping God in the right way sometimes, because I'm worshiping God for me. Maybe that's a start. Maybe it's a place to start, but I'm still attracted to these promises. Praying the rosary. Why praying the rosary? I'm not necessarily praying the rosary because I love God. I'm praying the rosary because of the promises of the rosary. I'm not necessarily fasting because I love God. I'm fasting because I self mortification, fat loss, like the tendency there is still very strong in me. And today I had asked God for His grace to show me how to love Him rightly.
Yeah,
Can I
really
just,
important point. These things don't go away. You work on them. Yeah, Tim?
yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I always admire Elliot's like brutal honesty, and a lot of times I compare when we do these subjective ones, my level of honesty to his. I'm like, I wasn't trying to hide anything, but he'll say stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I should amend that if we're being honest. Like when he's talked about it, or you've talked about it, Elliot, in other shows about trying to stand out, even with things that are supposed to be the highest, like religion. Like I struggled with that a lot too, or I guess struggle. And yeah, and then of course what you say about the selfish aspects of even properly ordered religion. That's something we all struggle. It's one of the three valid reasons to go to confession. Is it's the lowest one. Like you're looking after your own ass, spiritually. It's well ordered, but it's not the best. But yeah, especially what you said when you were looking for different religions. It's like young 20-year-old me. It just like I just liked to stand out, and that can become idolatry. But I really admire your emotional honesty on these things.
Yeah, I just have another confession to make as well. As you're saying that, like another thing I left out is family life, right? Like a part of what brought me back to the faith was that I noticed that my family was falling out of order. It was disordered. We had a good family, but my children were just, being more led by the world. And it's kind of like utilitarian in a way. It's like I saw the faith, the means for bringing my family back together and sanctifying all their souls. And it has worked. But it came out of a selfish place in a way where it's like, damn, look at my family. It's not the way I want it to be, right? And I looked at other families, I won't say enviously, but like jealously, like, wow, look at that well-ordered Catholic family. Like, why don't I have that? And so let me become more Catholic. Let me be more devoted in my faith so that my family looks better. So, that's where I'm at sometimes.
Yeah, I think this is something that everyone struggles with. And I liked Mike's point as well about how intellectual activity, philosophy can become a kind of idol too, because that's the temptation when you're trying to articulate all the great intellectual arguments for Catholicism. You can just get into tit for tat battles with people of making them look stupid and it being about one-upmanship, which is not the main point of it at all. It's about showing people the truth, goodness, beauty of it. But especially online, you get drawn into that kind of sphere and there's so much of it and lots of people wanting to engage. That's something I struggle with too. All right, we brought up the question of education a little bit with career and education being possible idols. But Tim raised the question of marriage there. So let's talk about the category of women next. We've actually got a question, which let's have a look at here. This shows a basic misunderstanding of what Christianity is all about. But who knows? Maybe some people might have this misconception. Isn't Christianity literally gynocentrism masked as my masculine God told me to serve my wife? Tim, do you want to have a stab at that one first?
Well, fuck no, that's wrong. It's just dead wrong. Like, it's not gynocentrism at all. It's literally Christianity is as we've covered in several shows, masculine religion. Like, God came incarnate as a man. He was the most manly man, the most long-suffering man. The church is his bride. That's not meaning we have to act like the bride. The church is, I don't know, anagogically his bride in heavenly logic. And the only time God came to earth, it was as a man. So you can't say that, well, isn't it real? But in a back way, isn't it gynocentric? Like, no. I mean, the answer is Christianity is a bifurcated patriarchy. You've heard us say it multiple times. It's an all-male episcopate. It's an all-male presbyterate. In the laity, men are in charge of their families. Wives have to submit to men. It's a sin for men to submit to wives in that sense. It's a mortal sin for women not to veil their headship, both liturgically, arguably, but also anagogically. It's a sin, St. Paul says, for men to veil their headship. Like that, you can't say, oh, if you're a good husband, then you're being like a bitch. It's like, no, if you're being a good husband, you're being a man. Like Will always says, maleness is defined as fatherhood and husbandhood in potency. And femaleness is defined the opposite way as motherhood and wifehood in potency. So no, like if you did, I mean, it's Aristotle's function argument. The most manly version of a man is adequating to the greatest degree of act, your potency. So no, and if you're a good husband, it's not, the church doesn't talk about serving your wife in the sense that you probably think. The church talks about doing your job to the utmost, which is just the Aristotelian function argument. And part of that is protection, which is manly. I mean, it's not low spirit gynocentric energy. It's high spirited. It's dynamic. full of power in Greek, dunamis, right? And yeah, you serve your kids in some sense. That's not girly either, but you should be the best husband you could be, which is not a 2022 or 2023 Tide commercial. It doesn't mean you're doing the laundry. It means you put yourself on the line. So I just don't know where. I understand that this is the modern energy of all the Christian denominations, including the Catholic one, but we talk every week about how that's wrong, and we're not making it up. So the real Christian energy is manly. It's that simple.
Yeah, and the one shot kill shot answer to this question is that Eve was made for Adam, not the other way around. Is that you couldn't get closer to just the perfect opposite of gynocentrism. The woman is literally made from the man for the man. So Christianity is patriarchy. And that's why, as you said, Tim, smash the patriarchy ultimately means smash Christianity. And the satanic energy, the Jezebel energy, which is trying to subvert the West, that's the gynocentrism. And it has Christianity as its number one enemy because it's smart enough to recognize what is a mortal threat to it. All right. Thanks for that answer, Tim. It's a good one. Mike and Elliot, if you want to jump in on this question, feel free. Otherwise, we're going to move on and talk about the category of women a bit more broadly.
Yeah, I'm ready
That
to
seemed
move
totally
on.
thorough to me. Nothing to add.
All right, cool. So I'll start here. So I met my wife when we were both 13, and then I've been with her since. And then I was an atheist at the time, wasn't really reading any serious books and falling into being what I'd describe as like a Nietzschean, just try and be really good at sports, be strong, survival of the fittest, all the rest of it. And then ended up with kids before being married. And at the time, didn't think there's anything wrong with that. And then pretty quickly, just from taking that role seriously and then naturally wanting to keep my wife at home and recognizing that it was not a good idea to have the kids in daycare. I did it for a little bit right at the start because everyone else was, but I thought this isn't good. And then what does it mean to be a good husband, be a good father, etc.? That was one of the main routes that took me to Christianity for some of the reasons that Tim was just talking about. What are your duties as a father, as a husband? And then marriage, and then slowly learning more and more about it. I wish I'd known all of that faster, the connection between the potential for fatherhood and the essence of manhood. And this is the most important role that a man can fulfill in his life, leading a family, leading his wife. But it was a question of fighting through bad education about this and also just a lack of it as well. And for someone to have that set out clearly, here's how it connects to your manhood. These are your duties. This is why it's more important than your job. You earn money to be able to provide for them, but the job is secondary. I wish I'd known that when I was 20. Mike, how about you?
I wish I had the word and the vocabulary and the concept of degeneracy back when I was 20, because I really think that would have given me some more fortitude and stick with itness to not fall into the mainstream culture that was degenerate. When I was straight edge. I didn't lose my virginity until I was 26. So I was like I was Catholic in many cultural respects, and a lot of the drinking and partying and like being a man in the military and going out on the weekends and getting laid and being, that's what men do. I thought that was, there's something, I didn't have the language for it. I thought like there's something not right about this. But then that ostracized me from a lot of my peers. They thought, what is this guy? Is he scared of women? Is he gay? Is he asexual? What's his deal? And I just didn't have the vocabulary to say, no, there's something degenerate. There's something wrong about this. And I think if I had that language, I think it would have prevented me, hopefully, to have not cracked and eventually went with it. So I just wish I didn't cave to the culture. and that I knew the concept of degeneracy, and I could articulate what in my bones I thought was wrong about that culture, and I could stick up for myself as opposed to being silent when folks were, thought I was just some goody two shoes with a stick up his butt.
Mm. Yeah, that's what masculinity really involves. It's not caring when people are saying stuff like that about you and being able to just show a spine and stick to your principles. And crucially, being able to walk away from those situations that are going to be occasions of sin too. So that's proper strength of character. Elliot, how about you?
Well, like yourself, I started dating my wife when we were in high school. We were 14 years old, and throughout our teens and 20s, we were together. But I had FOMO, right? Even though I loved my girlfriend and I enjoyed being with her, and we were fornicating. But that also led to the idea that perhaps I should be tasting other flavors. I need to get out there and have more girls, and that somehow I'm limited, and that my life is going to be stale and stagnant as a result of not dipping my spoon into every bowl of pudding that's out there. So, although I was saved for the most part from living a tremendously promiscuous life as a result, it didn't stop me from having fantasies and thinking and feeling left out, because at the same time, as a year old, we're dreaming about the future, right? And one half of me was like, all right, well, I see what the guys on MTV are doing, because back then we didn't have Instagram. So I watched like Biggie and Puff Daddy on a yacht, drinking, popping bottles of Grey Goose and a bunch of pretty girls. And man, I remember watching like Britney Spears videos and thinking like, man, I want a girl just like that. And maybe one day, not realizing the gift that I had, was Colleen, and who ultimately became my wife. So it took me, even early age stages of my marriage, after we had been married for a while and already had children, I still had like this latent fantasy that somehow I was missing out, and that a real man would have had, much more sexual experience, and would have uh, would have been, I got married early, so at this stage of my life, I had a lot of friends that were out there starting to get attention from girls, right? Because for men, it usually is a bit later, and feeling like hamstrung and like handcuffed. And so, it's funny because I was thinking about this today, and I'm so grateful that by the grace of God, I didn't get what I wanted, and he knew obviously what I wanted, and my life is so different than a lot of those guys that I was jealous of when I was younger. In fact, it's funny. I was just scrolling through YouTube before we got here, and I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe it's one of these smut videos, but it was a video about Jamie Foxx leaked some gay party that he and Puff Daddy and Mike Tyson were at. And so, like, these guys who were like celebrities I watched growing up, I guess they had so much sex that they just got bored. And so they started turning into like, and started doing all kinds of perverted stuff. And it's like, damn, man, I'm so happy I just got my one girl all this time. And man, I wouldn't trade that for the world. These guys are bored. So they're out boning each other in the butt. It's so weird.
That links to what Mike was saying about masculinity being to do with restraint. And it reminds me of what Tim said earlier of Christ as the model of restrained power. And it's turned out better for you in the end, Elliot. The temptation was that a man should always try and take everything he possibly can. But that story shows that can just lead to dissipation. Instead, you restrain, you focus, and then that's what pushes you forward. That's a good story. All right. Tim, how about you?
Mine's not the exact opposite of Elliot's, but I'm jealous sincerely that of both of you guys, that you knew your wives when you were like young and middle teenagers. I met my wife when she was 18, but I was technically 20. So and we weren't dating at first because she was dating my friend, And so I'd love to have said that I was 18. I always lament. You think I'm just saying it. I literally lament, like, I wish I'd been 3 months younger. So I would have been 19, right before I turned 20. I wish I could say we were both teenagers, but I wish we were middle teenagers. And one of my this isn't a true moral regret because there's nothing I could have really done about it. Wishing to have met. It's the kinetic difference between hoping and wishing, right? Aristotle talks about in book 4 of the Ethics. Like, you can't do anything about hoping or wishing. You can hope springs eternal, but there's nothing you can do about it. Not only that, I do wish that I'd had the foresight to just, even though my, Steph was dating my friend, just kind of tell her and my friend before they dated. I dated lots of girls, and we were all just kind of in a big group of friends. I wish that we'd gotten married, 6 months after we'd met each other, and I didn't have to wait a couple years until the group of friends, everybody broke up with their girlfriends, and I didn't have a girlfriend. I was just dating lots of girls, doing it, semi sleazy, not. I still had the stoicism, for which I'm eternally grateful. When I was dating a lot of different people, semi traditionally, but it was a lot, and I just wish I'd not wasted all that time and could have had the foresight to seeing, like, man, if this is like the perfect woman for you, which I was partly seeing at the time, but I just wish I'd kind of gone for it and told my friend and Steph, like, you guys need to break up because me and Steph are going to get married. We're made for each other. And then we could have had, 3 more kids, which when you have 7 kids, like, wasps laugh at you. But I really wish that by the time I'm now 42 years old, I had like 9 or 10 kids. And I wish that Steph and I had been married since the time she was like 18 and a half and I was, 20 and a half. It's just, you don't want to waste any time. Time is the thing you can't get back. Like Tucker Carlson said, he's like, I've wasted money on so much shit. Like, you can always get more money. You can always make more money. It's one of the easiest things in the world. But time is invaluable. I just love my wife, and I just wish, I wish we'd been married more on the front end.
Yeah. To everyone watching, if you're in Tim's situation there, you're young and you've got a woman that you want to marry, do it and start young. I mentioned that my wife was pregnant at 19. We weren't married. That was the right age. There's nothing wrong with being pregnant at 19, but you should be married. So I started at the right time, but on the wrong foot. And that was a regret of mine. But at the time, there wasn't anyone giving me that advice saying, look, this is important. You need to be married. I had to figure it out for myself, and luckily did it relatively quickly. But yeah, I wish I'd figured it out earlier.
Can I just add this? I was in the middle of watching The Two Towers with my dad, and I dated Steph a year. When we finally got to date, we dated about a year, and then he literally, I'm very grateful for this to my dad. I probably talk about too much about how, the church going energy came from my mom, but I'm very grateful to my dad that he said, like, very good insight. You've been dating Steph a year. Why don't you get married? You guys are great. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I never asked advice, never took advice much, but I'm thank you, Dad. That was great advice.
That's a good rule of thumb. Get engaged within a year. You know enough about the person by then, tops a year. These like 4 or 5 year engagements, what are you doing? Really important.
Or break up. Or if you don't know after a year, then break up. Break up or get engaged is a very good rule of thumb, and guys need these rules of thumb, and no one's giving it to them. They're telling them to lengthen it out more. So thank you, Dad, thank you for not saying the boomer thing, even though you can't help your generation. You said the opposite of the boomer thing.
When you're a young guy with raging hormones, 19, 20, 21, that is God's way of telling you get married, start a family. That's what it's for. Mm-hmm. That's what it's putting you for. So use it. Don't just dissipate it by masturbating at a computer screen or something pathetic. Okay, business. Tim, you've been fired. I've been fired. We've learned useful lessons from that. We'll come to us in a second. Elliot, though, you never had a job. You disgrace. What have you learned? What have you learned from in the wilderness fighting for yourself, self-employed since day one?
What I've learned is that there's no ceiling to what you can achieve, but there's no ground that will catch you, right? You're literally floating. And I think more than anything, it requires a tremendous amount of faith. Like, you have a job, you have faith in your boss, right? You have faith that he's going to pay you. You have faith that you're going to get that check. When you work for yourself, as you guys are discovering now, the faith is not so much in what I do, but what will come of it. Right? You could put in all the work in the world at you could work your face off, or you could work minimally with a paycheck job and you're still get your paycheck. You can work your face off for years as an entrepreneur and see diminishing returns. Right. I think there's one saying, I remember hearing very early on in being an entrepreneur, that entrepreneurship is personal development wrapped in a business. So I learned that my income is going to be dependent on how disciplined I am and how clear I am about what I'm doing and committed. And then, of course, how much.
Oh, we lost Elliot. Hopefully, he'll be back in a second. Connection was a bit weak there, but people who couldn't hear it, he made the great point that entrepreneurship is personal development wrapped up with your business life. So you put in, and then you might not get something out in the end. There's no guaranteed paycheck, but you have to be disciplined and then stick with it and wait for it to unfold. What I found was that I could do a great job as a teacher in the classroom. And when I was fired, there was a big petition with about 3,000 people saying, we don't want him fired. He's a great classroom practitioner. This is the best teacher we'd had. And it dwarfed the petition that they had trying to decolonize the curriculum for Black Lives Matter, which made me laugh. We got triple the number of signatures for me compared to BLM. But it doesn't matter, because nowadays, with the fuss around things being offensive and the way these institutions are going, sometimes it's because you're doing your job well, because you're standing up for the truth, that they can just cut that sword of Damocles hanging over your head and you're gone. So a job might feel safe, but actually it's a very precarious position to be in nowadays. Tim, you found the same, right?
Of course. Yeah, the exact same thing. No matter how popular you are as a teacher. I mean, Will, you seem like you'd have been such a cool teacher for a young man or woman to have. And I don't know, that's how I was as a teacher. I was very popular with my students, but it didn't matter ultimately, because they operate, the woke university, on the drop of poison in the cup principle that Leo the 13th talked about, that we on the right should talk about in terms of censoring out the bad ideas coming from the subversives. We don't, they do. So because there were a few malcontents that only a few of the ones that ever actually taught, and the vast majority of my students were neutral plus and going all the way up. But that's not how they operate. And I haven't been in the workplace for 3 years now. Right now, I'm writing the entrepreneurship ship, and just like Elliot, and it's actually much safer. Like I can say whatever I want. It's remarkable. So having a job is very precarious in 2023, where people are essentially brown shirting on each other. It's a good point. I hadn't thought about it till you said that.
Yeah, I trust my own skills and knowledge and drive and the market far more than I trust just an employer who's beholden to all kinds of winds that might be blowing, and then you don't know what's going to change in a few months' time. And the way these places are going, that's becoming something I think more and more people who care about the life of the mind need to realize. One of the things that I always remember from when I was sacked is that a student I taught years before ended up in the US, but I saw an article he'd published and he just put, I remember a summer school I did with Will because he was one of the first teachers who actually graded my essays and engaged with the ideas, like he cared about what I had to say. And I was thinking, that's it. It's not just about helping people get grades. You're forming people intellectually. And that's the kind of person who gets into these situations over points of principle where you're like, you've taken my job away, so I don't care if I get sacked. That's how I was.
Yeah.
Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I saw and felt the walls closing in around me at Oxford and then at Notre Dame. And unlike you guys, I just pulled the ripcord before a moment within the job proper actually got to me. But in retrospect, I think that was bound to happen, even were I to even stay in. I was already, the reason I left Oxford was because I was already getting pushback from my boss not to give my talk on transgenderism. So at some point, I would have tripped the alarms and had this crisis of conscience. Anyways, yeah. So I think that the entrepreneurship, it allows for, I think, the possibility of authenticity and to be able to live according to your principles. And I think that matters. That matters independent of whether or not the dollars and cents immediately follow. And I think it's worth it for the peace of mind and you're to be able to sleep well at night and know that you're not living as a hypocrite or as a liar or being complicit with a lot of things that you don't agree with. So for me, that was the motivation to strike out on my own. More just I couldn't stand the lies. I just couldn't stand it. It was physically eating me up inside whenever I was around it.
Mm.
And then in retrospect, I think that I would have pursued more entrepreneurial projects earlier in life had I a more, I don't know, a more neutral or even beneficent relationship with the concept of money. I think that I grew up in a milieu where it was like you were an honest worker if you were just a working class person, and if you aspired towards gaining riches, being striking out on your own, that's selfish. That's maybe you're motivated by greed. Isn't that unchristian? So I think that there's the whole love of money thing. Being a sin. I never understood that nuance. So I had this idea of rich people or people that aspire towards um, making something beyond just working class income is somehow that immediately translates to selfishness and greed. That was like the really dumb idea that I had in my head when I was younger. So I really wish my 20-year-old self understood that properly.
Yeah, just for people who don't get that nuance. So money isn't evil. Money isn't the root of all evil. The love of it is. So the inordinate desire for money, that's what causes the problems. The kind of guy who might do anything for a Bugatti, for example. That's where you get into trouble with money. When you're sacrificing your principles and your morality for it, you're getting it in dishonorable ways. So just look at the life of the average criminal if you want to know what happens when you have a disordered desire for money. But for a guy with a large family, me, Tim, Elliot have all got wives and kids to support. You need money to be able to do that. And it's instrumentally good for all those reasons. So there's nothing bad about aspiring to earn more. Like I would love to be able to save up enough to help my daughters out when they get married and give them a good start in life and help buy them a house. So that's one of my big goals, like the old school dowry, help the new husband with the wife and then give them a good push off into the world. That's one of the big things I'm saving for. I need money for that. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I just thought, no, I won't really push myself in my business life. So money's good, especially for a dad of a big family to have. Elliot, you cut off. We lost you for a bit, but you're making the great point that entrepreneurship is personal development wrapped up with your business life. Do you want to say another word about that?
Yeah, if I If I'm coming in clear, which it looks
I
like
can
I'm
hear
still
you.
a
Yeah.
little. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's a point in and of itself, right? Like you could be a slapdick at work, and until they fire you, you'll still get the same pay. But if you're working for yourself, it's hustle every single day, and that's commensurate with your ability to put in that work, one foot in front of the other every single day, man. So yeah, it's definitely how you show up matters more when you work for yourself.
Yeah. No pressure, no diamond. I read more, I think more, and I write more now than I ever did in the classroom. And I already did a lot more than most teachers then, but now it's another level entirely. And I've learned
That's right.
more since getting fired with self education than I did at university in 3 years of being taught. I did a bit in the library by myself, but mostly it was the lectures. They weren't that good, to be honest. So you can really accelerate yourself by lighting a fire under your ass by having to do it all off your own back.
Yeah, and when
Last category.
the,
Yeah.
the free market will correct you, right? Like you've got one boss that'll correct you at your job, but you've got, people think that when you work for yourself, you have no boss. The fact is, I've got thousands of bosses because if I don't satisfy their desires, then I get no customers. And then I have no money. So you're really having to pay attention to and and the market will totally course correct you. If you're going down the wrong route, no one's going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you, but you got to keep your fingers on the metrics and the bottom line, right? If the money's not coming in, it's not because of anything except you're just not doing something right, and there's no one there to tell you except the market. So you got to pay attention to what's going on, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Whereas if you got tenure, you can just say that trans women are women and you still get your paycheck.
Right. Yeah, you might say trans women are women,
You'll get a bonus for saying that.
trans women, and people will love you, right? Like you speak up the way you do to your audience, and they want to give you money. You speak up the way you do at the university, and they kick you out.
That's it.
Mhm.
Last category. We got some people who follow us and like to hear about working out, training, and how that connects to masculinity and strength of character and moral development. One of the big things that I learned too late in the gym was don't push too hard for too long. One of the reasons I managed to get strong in the first place is being a bit of a hothead, stubborn, and always pushing, and just training when most people wouldn't. But that exact same attitude can also burn you out and hurt you. So being able to just dial it back a little bit and play the long game, slow and steady, that's been a big lesson for me. And fitting in training around having a big family as well, little and often and consistently, not trying to do anything big and heroic, but just playing the long game and think of it as like a 10-year project. That's what really matters. Are you still going to be doing this in 10, 15, 20 years? Otherwise, who cares if you get your beach body bro in 12 weeks if you're fat in 6 months' time because you can't keep the discipline? So,
Right.
little doses that you can sustain, and also involving your family in it as well, because it's good to have hobbies like this, but you don't want to become obsessive. It's a great thing if you can go away and clear your mind and come back better able to do your duties as a father and a husband. But I think try and involve your kids and your wife where you can. Like Tim, you said you like to go out and shoot hoops with your son. I think that's a good way to approach it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, actually, my daughters too, for all of my anti WNBA rhetoric. My second eldest daughter really enjoys to play. She's like, I'm not going to try to be a pro, Dad. I'm like, you don't have to reassure me. No, working out is with heavyweights is one of those things that I'm always on and off because I have same thing that dogged me when I played basketball. I have a really bad lower back, so I'm always getting injured, cutting it out for a year. When Mike was kind of living at our house with us when we were finishing Don't Go to College for a month. I wasn't lifting at all because I was coming off another lower back injury. So I just always, when I'm lifting, I'll do the same thing. I'll push a little too hard, get injured, be off of it, and get really skinny or fat or skinny fat for a year, or a year and a half and then go back to it. So it's something I'm still learning. Like when I'm in it, I'm all in it until I get injured. And again, I cut corners. I don't stretch. I don't warm up enough. And as a 42-year-old man, if you haven't learned this lesson, you're probably never going to learn it. It's ridiculous. But so I'm always like a year in, a year out, and it's injury. So I should probably take the lesson, I guess.
Yep, slow and steady all the time, and just trying to stay. I suppose it's temperance, isn't it, in regard to like the zeal for training as well, not taking on too much. Mike, how about you?
I'd say there's that phrase: hang around a barbershop long enough, you get a haircut. So I think that for me, anyways, that's been the number one hack that I've used to get back in shape and to stay in shape is just go to a fight gym, go to a chalk gym, go to not some Globo gym, not some sort of Planet Fitness thing where it's totally alienating and no one knows each other. Go to some type of local gym that has some soul to it and just hang out, and you will then get fit. If you just hang out there, it's like it's osmosis. It's the most like magical thing in the world. You just hang out there, and then suddenly you want to be there, and then suddenly there's a competition coming up, and then suddenly someone's like, "Hey, why don't you tag along?" And the positive peer pressure pulls you in, and then next thing you know, you're in that community, and then it's not a workout anymore. It's a lifestyle. It's your friend group. It's a thing that you think about in your off time. And it was like that in the military as well, with a lot of group PT stuff, pro to CrossFit stuff that we were doing. So I would say, yeah, just physically go to a place, physically just be there, and that will the physical culture will rub off on you.
Yeah,
Don't do the opposite. Don't be like, I'm just going to buy fitness equipment in my house and in my apartment and just look at it, and it's going to become a laundry rack.
you can get that kind of brotherhood that a lot of men are missing out on today.
Yes.
By just going somewhere regularly like that. It makes me laugh because I know guys that I trained with years ago, like 10, 15 years ago. I still talk to them now, even though we barely said a word to each other at the time, because you've got that connection between them.
Yep.
And if I'm walking down the street and then just pass a stranger and you know that person's serious about lifting, just like give them a nod. You know there's something between the two of you. Elliot, how about you?
Yeah.
What I've discovered is that micro dosing exercise is the way to go, right? So you got to work fitness into everything you do. So recently, in the past couple months, I've been praying not just on my knees, but sitting on my heels, because it will really stretch your knees, it stretches your peroneals, and you got to breathe, and you got to learn how to relax those muscles down your lower leg that are really tense because you're walking all day long. So, I don't know how you take this, but like I've worked exercise into my prayer life by making sure that I get down into my knees. I'm praying, but at the same time, I'm teaching my body to take on a form that is not normal and natural to it, especially for years of doing powerlifting and strongman. Another thing too is, check this out. So I spent a lot of my time behind a desk, and as a result, I can raise it. So, standing up, it burns calories. Standing up is exercise. A lot of people think that you need to have concentrated time at the gym. Like when I was younger, in the morning, I would do a power walk for an hour. And then I'd be behind my desk all day long. And then in the evening, I would do, an hour-long powerlifting workout, where now, I'm standing here. I'll be getting on my knees in a couple hours to pray. And then I'm going to go for a walk. I take like 3 or 4 walks every day, a quarter-mile walk. It's about a quarter mile around my lake, quarter-mile walks. If I've been sitting too much, I'll get up and stretch. Working out every day, not in a way that, like, I couldn't work out every day if I was still being a power lifter and strongman like I was in the past. Right now, I just do one set to failure, but I do a little bit every single day, micro dose, and spread it out instead of just crushing myself. with one workout or infrequent workouts. I do lots of little frequent workouts and then try to build it into my life, right? Even walking around the house, I've discovered that by being barefoot more often, it teaches my body my ankles and my knees to be more supple. I have to be more mindful with every little step I take. One of the things I started to recognize is that, like, I'm so comfortable in my Birkenstocks, I walk around and my feet are just flopping. Most people walk on their legs. They don't walk with their legs, because you can just stomp around with these big cushy soles under your feet. But just by taking off your shoes and walking, you got to be much more mindful when you walk barefoot, especially on a hard floor. That's a workout. So me walking from here to my living room is like I'm exercising. I have to be conscious of what I'm doing. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is, instead of thinking of exercise as like a thing I do, it's got to be who you are all day long. Stand up more, bend down more, kneel more, stretch more, walk more, breathe more, and make it omnipresent throughout the day.
Yeah.
You know, something weird that I noticed is, yeah, I do that too. I don't know if this is horrible. I've been doing, because I did buy workout equipment once I came off this last injury, and I'm just in my garage and I do the microdosing you're talking about, Elliot. But I'll do like squats and stuff barefoot. I'm barefoot around the house a lot. I'll shoot when I go out and shoot. I'll go back and forth between shooting and lifting weights. And like, if I'm hitting 70% of my 3-pointers, if I go out and get up 50 shots or 100 shots barefoot, when I throw on shoes, then it drops to like 60, 55%. It makes me more like tactile, like the pedidexterity or something. It's really weird, but it's very consistent that I have a drop off in outside shooting percentage when I move from having no shoes to shoes. So that's
Weird.
odd you mentioned that. Yeah.
Well,
There are pressure points in your feet, there are nerves in your feet, and we normally have dumb feet because they're in shoes. So yeah, every time you get out there and barefoot, like, all types of synapses are firing that normally wouldn't. All the way up the
Yeah.
body too, because there's a ground reaction force, right? The feet hold. I think I froze again. But by working the feet, everything up chain turns on a little bit more.
that's a
very
good
interesting.
reminder that we're embodied beings, and Christianity being the religion of the incarnation, physical training belongs to Christians more than it does to any other religion. So we need to reclaim this. We mentioned this before. So we've all found then that regularity and some kind of microdosing of exercise is really important. And that was a game changer for me, switching from a couple of big infrequent workouts to pretty much daily short workouts with an actual higher weekly volume. I ended up getting stronger, faster because the total volume was higher. So that's been really good. So anybody struggling to be consistent with your training, try that out, see. And I pray the rosary in between sets as well. So I still do my powerlifting, have quite long rest periods because it's heavy. I'll just sit there and pray or read the Psalms or do the rosary. So I get a lot done in that time period. All right, guys, any final thoughts? Otherwise, it's been a great chat, I think. Thanks so much for all the wisdom and the honesty as well. We talk
Yeah, it's a
about
great show,
masculinity.
Will.
It's
Thank you.
good to do
Great
that.
idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like this one. I like this one a lot. Yeah, thanks for the and thanks for taking over for me this week. Well, I'm in northern Mississippi. Met with Michael Knowles last night. We were hanging out till late and talking, and so it's good. I like being able to be on the road, and if it's on one of your guys' channels, do this. So I'll swap out for your week whenever that is. Well,
Cool.
thank you guys.
You're welcome. All right, guys, take care. Speak to you soon.
God bless.
God bless.
Hey, Mike.